Hey everyone, and welcome back to Dawn Nerds, and here is our Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster review. So Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is a nostalgic trip back into the zombie-filled shopping mall of Willamette that we first ventured into back in 2006. Despite having previously been brought to modern consoles, this remaster takes the core essence of the original Dead Rising and adds a little bit of visual polish whilst kind of enhancing certain mechanics for audiences and keeping much of the original flavour intact. The story and the setting. So for those unfamiliar with Dead Rising, the game follows the story of Frank West, a photojournalist who's investigating a strange occurrence in the fictional town of Willamette, Colorado, with a population of 53,594 and not much to do there other than kill time at the mall. Frank quickly finds himself trapped inside the massive shopping mall, surrounded by hordes of zombies, hostile survivors, and a few psychopaths that have found themselves in the midst of the outbreak too. The ticking clock with its 72-hour in-game cycle is the main driver of tension throughout the game, forcing you to manage your time and missions carefully as the 3 days in the mall slowly dwindle down. The narrative remains compelling enough, though, with no changes to the original story. Thankfully, only a few changes have happened with some of the lines that are delivered by the psychopaths to keep it more in line with a modern audiences, despite everyone saying it was woke. Frank is still filled with his charm and charisma, and only this fuels his desire to uncover the truth behind the outbreak in Willamette. And combined with the cast of survivors such as Jesse, Brad and Otis, whilst not forgetting obviously the colourful psychopaths that we come across, keep players engaged for the majority of their time with the game. The remaster hasn't added any new content to the story itself, however the original charm still shines through, and most who have played the game in 2006 will feel right at home, or for those of you that have played the remaster before this one, we'll see no changes at all. There is something uniquely entertaining about the blend of like the goofy, campy horror that kind of you'd expect from a B-movie film. It definitely is something that hasn't been captured in any other franchise. The graphics and visual updates. The most obvious changes in the remaster is the visual upgrade. Textures have been upgraded with lighting being massively improved, and the game now runs at a much smoother frame rate, targeting roughly 60 frames per second, although it does occasionally dip at times, depending on the amount of zombies on screen. And the character models look much cleaner, with Frank's iconic design holding up well, despite having a bit of a facelift and a voice change. TJ Rotolo does not return, to much fans' anguish, and instead is replaced by Jazz Patrick, who in my opinion still does a fine job throughout the game, but I'll get more onto this later. However, since this is a remaster and not a full-on remake, the game still benefits hugely thanks to being moved over to the RE engine rather than the MT framework engine that it was on. Some of the animations that you will see throughout the game feel a little bit dated and kind of not in line with today's standards. However, gone are the text blocks that required a HD TV to read it for those that remember that in 2006 who first purchased it on Xbox 360, where you couldn't read the text that half of the characters were saying unless you had a HD TV. That said, the increased resolution, sharper textures, and graphical overhauls to each area make the world feel much more alive. The mall now feels like an actual working mall, and this includes the carnage that ensues as you mow through the hordes of zombies, proving to be as satisfying now as it ever was. Each of the areas in the mall have been given a massive graphical overhaul. Paradise Plaza, with its kind of underwater theme that it has going on, Entrance Plaza, having the fairy lights and other lights that scatter the actual mall, now feel like it should have been back in 2006, but never was due to the limitations of the hardware. Lighting updates, particularly in the outdoor sections and the darker areas of the mall, do add a layer of atmosphere that was missing in the original. However, it can be too dark in certain aspects sometimes, and it causes a bit of frustration, making the game look a lot more washed out than it could have done. Still, obviously, with the foundation from 2006 that was used for this deluxe remaster, it's functionally still there and proved to be a great basis to build off of in the newer engine. Gameplay and mechanics. The core gameplay of Dead Rising has always been a mix of zombie bashing action and time management survival. You have a variety of makeshift weapons at your disposal, everything from baseball bats, chainsaws, lawnmowers, and a lot of fun comes from experimenting with the tools that you find around you. Whether that's plant pots, guitars, you're never really short of finding something to whack a zombie with, or to experiment with in terms of maybe throwing CDs or vinyls like you're in Shaun of the Dead. The remaster keeps this chaos intact, which is great for veterans of the series who love that sandbox-like freedom of zombie slaying, and the weapon system features the ability to move whilst aiming now if you choose the control setting at the beginning of the game. Whilst inventory management remains pretty much unchanged. You still have the same amount of slots available. Most weapons now show a visible durability meter and last a little longer in their use. You'll find that you'll be picking up more weapons that you never did in comparison to the original. Photography element takes a much better precedence, I felt, because PP is now earned much faster through like photography than it was in the original. You barely got any in the original, which meant that most people never really used it. However, now the PP that you earn through photography can be used to level you up much, much faster. And by the time I'd even finished my first playthrough, I'd already hit level 50. In addition to obviously the photography elements, Frank can now apply various upgrades to his camera, and he can have flash and motion blur, things like that obviously you will find throughout the mall in the various photography stores. Players will also find the developers added in the ability to fast forward time now. So gone are the days of waiting around, twiddling your thumbs, literally killing time before the next case would start. This also applies to Infinite Mode, which makes a return with this remaster, and obviously Overtime Mode. One thing to mention is that they've made the Infinite Game Mode more of a mode to play for fun now, with psychopaths and survivors spawning randomly, including cultists and special forces on day 3, which has proven to be a run-ender for some players who have got themselves stuck by the special forces, infinitely shooting them because they can't get up. Zombies also randomly drop loot now, so instead of it being only a mode that was used for attempting the infamous 7-day survivor trophy or achievement, players can now dip in and just have fun. Still, you still need to keep an eye on your health, as this still depletes over time. It's something to be aware of. Survivor AI has a huge overhaul too. No longer will they willingly be eaten or stand around stuck on stairs, plant pots and more. Instead, they actually act in a very similar fashion to the survivors found Chuck's adventure during Dead Rising 2. They're a bit more manageable. They don't wander off and get themselves lost. Most will manage themselves and also benefit from being in certain items now, which causes them to point out PP stickers or items or food, or they might talk about other survivors on their journey whilst Frank is rescuing them. Small but worthwhile change to note is that now you don't have to worry about Otis's calls now, as they can be listened to without the worry of being interrupted, thanks to the ability to actually listen to it on a radio without having to answer it constantly. Difficulty and accessibility. So the remaster doesn't significantly alter the difficulty level of the original game, which will be a double-edged sword for many players. On one hand, veterans of the series will appreciate the challenge of the fact we have a time mode back again, considering Dead Rising 4 was an absolute departure from the series. We'll never ever be able to get rid of that one. You'll still have the game's tight deadlines, the encounters that you find. But on the other hand, newer people to the franchise, more modern players, may find it less forgiving and struggle with certain aspects, despite the developers making it easier to level up, as I mentioned previously. Boss fights against the psychopaths, those human enemies that have their very unique, disturbing personalities, can still prove to be difficult if not prepared for beforehand. And sometimes you never know if you're going into a psychopath fight. If you were a newbie to the series and you had a call for Above the Law, if you were going there, you wouldn't know that you're about to fight a police officer. A rather large police officer at that. So it can be a bit like trial and error, forcing them to maybe replay sections or prepare a little bit better. But luckily, they added in an auto-save feature that has been introduced, so there's not much backtracking if you do die, like in the 2006 version. While this is part of the game's charm for some, others like myself, I found it slightly off-putting, and I didn't use the auto-save feature. And as a veteran, you will manage this and be completely at home, facing no issues, because you know what's coming. That said, the remaster does improve the loading times significantly between areas. So when you are loading in or dying again and reloading, having it so that now loading between areas is much, much quicker. It's about 1 to 2 seconds. You don't really notice blink and you miss it. However, I do wish that they would have made the actual mall itself completely open world and there was no loading between areas. It would have been a nice feature for them to add in. Onto the audio and soundtrack. The soundtrack is another element that hasn't seen a major overhaul. The original music actually returns with the likes of Gone Guru by Lifeseeker that blares through Leisure Park every time you go through it, due to a certain amount of bugs that still feature in the game. Every time the convicts return, if they're not killed or are killed before certain times. But it still fits, and thanks to the tone of the game, well. You still get to hear the light jazzy mall music that plays in the background whilst the gory chaos you're causing, which inevitably adds to the dark humor and kind of the goofy B-movie kind of vibe that the game goes for. The voice acting throughout the entire game is now fully voiced, with survivors being able to talk to Frank. And as cheesy as it was in the original, Frank still delivers his lines with the over-top bravado that fits his character. The survivor voices I found fitted the characters well. They suited them. There wasn't anyone that I thought was a bit like, oh no, that doesn't really work. Otis in particular, amazing. I love the fact they got Lee Everett from The Walking Dead to voice his character. It fits him superbly. And Jazz Patrick, who's voicing Frank, does a great job of being the new Frank. I feel like he delivers a sense of emotion to character that was a little bit missing in the original, not because of the voice, but mostly because of the facial scanning being much better now and allows for more emotion to be brought through on the actual character itself. However, there are a few characters that fall a little bit flat. Brad comes to mind, and during the second half of the game, his voice actor sounds like he really does not want to be there, which is a shame. But very rarely did any of them feel out of place. The sound effects, particularly the satisfying thuds and splats of the smashing zombies, are still impactful. Even though the remaster hasn't added any new audio layers, players will still be accustomed to the more immersive sound design that modern games feature. But however, it still works with this game because it is a remaster, it's not a remake. Performance. Overall, the performance improvements are one of the highlights of this remaster. The game runs a lot smoother, loads a lot faster, as I mentioned, which makes revisiting Dead Rising a much more enjoyable experience. That said, the game does suffer from occasional frame rate dips, particularly on Xbox. I noticed there was quite a few dipping down into the 40s at times when bigger areas would load. The maintenance tunnels and the leisure park come to mind when I was thinking of those. However, I did find that the leisure park and the maintenance tunnels are nowhere near as dense as they used to be. I believe this is most likely due to a limitation of the RE engine that they are using. Another small but welcome change is the inclusion of the DLC costumes and the extra content that they've added in the Deluxe Remaster version. And they do offer new ways to experience the game, like having Leon and Chris costume or Nemesis costume, some of the Mega Man costumes. They've added more in. They don't change the game, it's just a new way to kind of experience it. They don't even alter the gameplay at all in any significant way. Overall, my final thoughts. So Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is a faithful recreation of what I would class as a cult classic, offering fans of the original a chance to experience the game with improved visuals and smoother performance. It retains that quirky charm, the chaotic gameplay, and unique time management system that made the original memorable. However, this remaster won't be for everyone. The slight changes may turn others away, preferring the original over this, whether that's the voice lines, the dialogue being changed, some of the gameplay elements being able to fast forward, veteran players may not like. The game's core mechanics, including the time management and the unforgiving difficulty that some might consider, might feel dated to new players unfamiliar with that kind of structure that was around in 2006. But for long-time fans or players looking to experience a piece of zombie game history, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster delivers a satisfying trip down memory lane. If you love the original, this remaster is a worthy revisit, even with some of the issues it still faces due to bugs and other issues that hopefully will be patched out. For new players, it's a worthwhile experience and one that shouldn't be taken lightly, especially due to the factors mentioned above. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed replaying the game and clocking in at around 22 hours for the Platinum. It was a worthy remake, and I'll be waiting for the announcement of Dr. 2 or Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster 2. Overall, I gave this game an 8 out of 10. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.